Ava Gardner's Malibu beachfront home, with its sweeping ocean views and understated glamour, was a sanctuary for the Hollywood icon during her lifetime. The house, designed in a mid-century style with large glass panels and airy spaces, has since become the subject of chilling tales that blur the line between memory and mystery. Visitors to the property often report a sudden drop in temperature, even on the hottest California afternoons. These cold spots, as described by multiple witnesses, seem to move unpredictably throughout the home. One moment I'd feel the warmth of the sun through the windows, a recent guest shared, and the next, an icy draft would sweep past, as if someone walked through me. But perhaps the most unsettling experiences involve Ava Gardner's favorite perfume, a distinct, floral fragrance that was said to be her signature. More than a few guests have claimed to catch the scent lingering in the air, often in her former bedroom or near the balcony where she loved to watch the waves. The perfume's presence is fleeting, vanishing as quickly as it appears, leaving behind a sense of unease. Then there's the matter of being watched. Contractors working on renovations have refused to return after feeling inexplicably observed, even when alone. One handyman recounted, "I was in the kitchen installing a light fixture. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt this heavy gaze on me. When I turned, there was no one there, but I swear someone was standing just a few feet away." Adding to the lore, a family renting the property reported hearing faint laughter at night, as though carried by the ocean breeze. On one occasion, a woman staying in the guest room claimed to have seen a shadowy figure reflected in the bathroom mirror, a figure with Ava's unmistakable silhouette, clad in what appeared to be a flowing gown. While skeptics argue that these phenomena are tricks of the mind, those who've experienced them firsthand are less dismissive. "Ava's energy is still here," a longtime neighbor remarked. "She loved that house. It's like she never left." Whether a manifestation of Ava Gardner's undying connection to her Malibu retreat or the echo of her glamorous, tumultuous life, the house remains a fascinating and unsettling reminder of Hollywood's golden age. The most chilling account comes from a couple who rented the house for a weekend retreat. Drawn by its Hollywood history and breathtaking ocean views, they arrived expecting luxury and relaxation. Instead, their stay became a harrowing experience they would never forget. On their first night, as the couple sipped wine on the balcony, the wife noticed what looked like faint footprints in the sand below. The strange part? They appeared to lead directly from the ocean to the house despite the tide being high enough to wash away any trace of such a path. Intrigued, they dismissed it as a quirk of nature, but unease lingered. Later that evening, the husband ventured into the living room to retrieve his phone. He froze when he saw the reflection of a figure in the large glass panel that faced the ocean. It was a woman, her hair perfectly coiffed, standing just behind him. When he spun around, the room was empty. She was there, he later told friends, his voice trembling. "I swear, I could see her outline even after I turned like a shadow burned into my eyes." The second night brought more disturbing events. As the couple lay in bed, they were startled awake by a loud crash. They rushed to the living room to find a heavy framed photograph of Ava, which had been securely mounted on the wall, lying shattered on the floor. The glass was broken, but the photo remained eerily pristine. What caught their attention, however, was the faint smell of burning like a recently extinguished candle. It wasn't until the early hours of their last night that the wife experienced something she could barely describe. Unable to sleep, she wandered into Ava's former dressing room, a space that had been left largely untouched by the house's modern updates. Sitting at the vintage vanity, she traced her finger along the edge of a dusty compact mirror. For a brief moment, as she glanced into the mirror, she thought she saw another face staring back at her, not her own, but someone else's, someone unmistakably beautiful yet eerily lifeless. Before she could scream, a faint whisper broke the silence, so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. But the words were clear: "You shouldn't be here." Panicked, she fled the room, dragging her husband out of the house without even stopping to pack their bags. Locals claim the couple's story is just one of many, with some suggesting the house holds more secrets than anyone is willing to admit. The real question remains, why does Ava's spirit linger here? And what or who could she be waiting for? As the couple sped away from the house, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It lingered with them throughout their entire drive, as though something invisible had attached itself to their every movement. They later spoke of a shadow, a dark form, that seemed to hover just outside the car window during the drive down the winding coastal road. It never approached, but always seemed to be at the edge of their vision, just out of reach. Months passed before the house was rented again, this time to a renowned actress from a new generation, drawn to the allure of Ava Gardner's legacy. She arrived with the intent to stay for several weeks, eager to experience the serenity and history the house promised. But within days, she began to report strange occurrences, each one escalating in intensity. It began innocently enough, an unexpected chill in the air, the soft scent of perfume that would appear and vanish in the blink of an eye. She brushed it off, attributing the cold spots to the ocean breeze and the perfume to a lingering scent from previous guests. But then, one evening, after a long day of filming, she came home to find the front door ajar, despite having locked it herself. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, save for the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. But as she walked through the entryway, something caught her eye, a figure, barely visible in the reflection of the hallway mirror. It wasn't a full figure, but more of a vague outline, like the reflection of someone who had been there but vanished moments before. Her curiosity led her deeper into the house, where she noticed the vintage record player in the living room was on, playing a song she didn't recognize, soft, haunting music. But the most unsettling part wasn't the music itself, it was the fact that the record player had not been touched since her arrival. The actress approached the player cautiously, as if expecting the music to stop. Instead, it grew louder, more insistent, almost as though it was beckoning her to listen closer. The song seemed to distort as she reached out to touch it, warping into an inaudible murmur that grew louder, shifting into an unintelligible whisper. She quickly turned off the player, but the echo of the voice remained, ringing in her ears long after the music stopped. That night she couldn't sleep. The atmosphere in the house had changed. It felt heavier, charged with a presence she couldn't explain. She tried to dismiss it, but the whispers persisted. Around midnight, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing in the hallway just outside her room. At first, they were slow and deliberate, as though someone was walking with purpose. Then the footsteps quickened, until they were running, circling the house, growing louder and more frantic. She bolted out of bed, terrified, but when she reached the hallway, no one was there. Confused, she searched the house, room by room, yet found nothing. But as she passed the old library, Ava's former favorite spot, she felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She paused, listening. From within the room came a soft, muffled sound like the rustle of a page turning. She pushed the door open cautiously, and there, on the floor, was a book, one of Ava's personal novels, its pages open to a random chapter. The actress picked it up, a shiver running down her spine as she read the words, "Do you think you're the first to feel me here?" Frantic, she closed the book, but the sensation of being watched intensified. The oppressive presence seemed to hover closer, almost suffocating. Then, without warning, the room grew unbearably cold. She glanced toward the window, where the reflection in the glass wasn't her own. Instead, she saw the image of a woman standing in the shadows, staring back at her with an expression that was both longing and sorrowful. The actress recoiled, but the reflection remained, even when she turned her head. It was as though Ava's spirit had solidified in that moment, watching her every move. She knew she was no longer alone in the house. Unable to stay another minute, she fled into the night, her car tires screeching against the winding road. But as she sped away, she glanced into the rearview mirror and swore she saw a shadow standing at the balcony of the house, watching her disappear into the dark. No one stayed at Ava's house for long after that, and rumors began to spread, stories of people hearing the echoes of her voice late at night, faint laughter drifting on the ocean breeze, and whispers that could only be described as the voice of someone who wasn't quite gone. But the question remained, why did Ava Gardner's spirit refuse to leave her beloved house? And why was it that those who ventured too close to the truth were never the same again? Was it love that kept her tethered? Or something far darker and more insidious? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. A few months after the actress's harrowing escape, the house remained empty, its reputation now steeped in whispered legends. Yet, one day, a young writer, eager to escape the chaos of the city and find inspiration for his next novel, arrived at the property. Drawn by the stories surrounding Ava Gardner's legacy, he saw it as the perfect place to unlock his creativity. Little did he know, his stay would turn into something far darker than anything he had ever written. At first, the house seemed to embrace him. The solitude was soothing, the gentle crash of waves against the shore lulling him into a sense of peace. But as the days wore on, something began to shift. It started with strange dreams of a woman standing by the ocean, staring out at the horizon as if waiting for something. Her face was never fully visible, but her presence was undeniable. The dreams felt so vivid, so real, that he woke each morning feeling as though he had lived through them. On the fourth night, the air grew thick with tension. The writer had settled into a routine of working by day and walking along the beach by night, trying to clear his mind. But that evening, as he strolled toward the water, he felt a sudden coldness sweeping in from the shore, far colder than the usual night breeze. He turned, feeling a familiar, eerie sensation of being watched. His heart pounded as he stared back at the house, the windows dark and lifeless. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw her, a figure standing in the upstairs window, her face partially obscured by shadows. She seemed to be watching him, her posture rigid, as though waiting for him to come closer. His breath caught in his throat as he stared at the figure, unable to move. The ocean waves crashed against the shore in a violent crescendo, drowning out everything but the thumping of his heart. With his pulse racing, he turned and ran back to the house, the sound of his footsteps echoing across the empty beach. When he reached the front door, it was wide open, the same as it had been on the actress's first night there. He hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the door handle. Inside, the house was still, the silence pressing in from all sides. He stepped cautiously into the hallway, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension that gripped his chest. It was as though the house was waiting for him to make the next move, as if the air itself was alive with anticipation. His eyes drifted to the library door, Ava's former sanctuary. He had been avoiding it, unnerved by the stories he had heard from previous tenants. But tonight, something compelled him to open it. As he stepped into the room, the scent of her perfume hit him like a physical blow. The heavy floral fragrance, once faint and elusive, was now thick in the air, suffocating him with its presence. The desk in the corner was exactly as it had been left, papers scattered across its surface, a lamp turned on, and a single pen lying next to an open notebook. But what caught his attention was the mirror above the desk. It wasn't the usual mirror, it was antique, framed in ornate gold, and positioned so it caught the light in a way that made it almost shimmer. As he approached it, the room seemed to darken, the air growing colder. His reflection seemed distorted, flickering as though it wasn't entirely his own. And then he saw her. Ava Gardner's reflection stood behind him, her eyes fixed on his with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Her lips parted as if she was about to speak, but no sound came from her mouth. The pen on the desk began to move, sliding across the surface as though guided by invisible hands, tracing letters on the page. Frozen in place, he read the words, "You are not alone here." The pen stopped, and the mirror seemed to pulse with an energy that reverberated through his body. It was as if Ava's spirit was trying to communicate, trying to force him to understand something he wasn't sure he was ready to know. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the faintest whisper curled around his ears. "You are not the first to stay, and you won't be the last." The house seemed to groan under the weight of its history. It was as though Ava was trying to tell him something he could feel, deep in his bones, but couldn't fully grasp. He stumbled back, his heart pounding, eyes darting toward the door. But before he could reach it, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The air grew thick with an oppressive force, as if the very walls were closing in around him. Panicking, he fumbled for his phone, the screen flickering to life. He turned the flashlight on and swung it across the room. The reflection in the mirror was gone. But in its place, a shadow moved across the walls, silent, swift, like something that wasn't bound by the same rules of reality. His breathing grew shallow, and as he turned to leave, something caught his foot. He looked down to find a book, one that hadn't been there before. It was open to a page with the words, "You will be chosen. You have been warned." The room suddenly felt suffocating, as if the house itself had decided to keep him there. Was it Ava's spirit or something far darker that had taken root within the house? Now, the young writer had a choice to make. Stay and unravel the house's terrifying mystery, or flee and risk losing more than just his sanity. But in a place where time seemed to bend and reality twisted with every passing moment, even the bravest soul might not walk away unscathed. The writer's pulse thundered in his ears as he stood frozen, the book gripped tightly in his hands. The whispering voice echoed in the back of his mind, growing louder as the oppressive weight of the house pressed down on him. "You will be chosen. You have been warned." He took a step backward, then another, his legs shaking beneath him. His breath came in shallow gasps, his mind racing to understand what was happening. But everything felt just out of reach, sliding between the cracks of his understanding. He could feel the house, as if it was watching him, measuring him, waiting. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room, followed by a sharp, unmistakable sound. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and coming from somewhere deep within the house. His heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the door, knowing there was no escape. The house was no longer simply a place, it was alive, a living entity that had grown attached to him, its new occupant. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right behind him. Turning on his heel, he rushed to the door. But as his hand reached the handle, a cold force slammed into him from behind, pushing him forward. He stumbled into the hallway, his legs barely keeping him upright as the darkness seemed to stretch and contort. The house was pulling him in, refusing to let him go. The air grew frigid, and the perfume, Ava's perfume, returned, clinging to his clothes and curling in his nostrils, stronger than ever. He whipped his head around, but there was no one there. The house, though, was full of presence, like 1,000 eyes, watching, waiting. Then, from behind him, came a voice, soft, ethereal, but unmistakable. "You're the one, aren't you?" He spun around, his breath caught in his throat. There, at the end of the hall, stood the figure of a woman, Ava Gardner. But she wasn't as he expected. Her beauty, once radiant, was now faded, as though time had worn her down, like a photograph left out in the sun too long. Her eyes were empty, hollow like two dark, endless voids. "I waited for you," she whispered, her voice like a sigh carried on the wind. "I waited, because you're the one who can finish my story." The writer could barely breathe. His legs gave out beneath him, and he sank to the floor, his mind a blur. It wasn't just the house that was haunting him, it was Ava herself. A lingering, restless spirit desperate for closure. Her presence wasn't just a haunting. It was a beckoning, an invitation to understand something far darker, far more twisted than he had ever imagined. The temperature dropped even further, and the floor beneath him seemed to tremble. The shadows in the room stretched and reached toward him, like fingers of a giant hand. The air was thick with the scent of her perfume, suffocating him. Ava took a slow, deliberate step forward, her hollow eyes locked onto his. "You'll finish it," she said. "You'll write my ending." But then, with a suddenness that made his heart stop, she lunged forward, her cold, ghostly hand gripping his wrist tightly. His body went numb, his vision spinning as a strange, otherworldly force consumed him. The room, the house, everything began to fade as the ground beneath him dissolved into a void, the walls twisting and buckling like paper in the wind. Ava's voice echoed in his mind, her words reverberating in the blackness around him. "You're part of the story now. You can never leave." His final scream was swallowed by the dark, And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the house fell silent. The next morning, the house stood alone, as it had for years. The waves crashed against the shore as they always had. The wind whispered through the trees. But in the upstairs window, there was a figure, a shadow, indistinct yet familiar, watching, waiting. And the house, once again, had a new story to tell. Those who had dared to enter Ava Gardner's haunted home were never the same. They left, yes, but the house left its mark on them. In the dead of night, some could still smell the faint scent of perfume on the breeze. Others would hear the echo of whispers in their minds. The house didn't just hold the past. It consumed those who stepped into it. And the writer, like so many before him, was simply the latest chapter in its never-ending tale. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.